Russia is urgently buying oil from Belarus after a wave of drone strikes on its energy sector. At least 10 major refineries have been hit this month. CNN's latest article is titled "Ukraine is stepping up attacks on Russian energy and it's working." We'll be developing the story further with my guest in the studio, Dr. Thomas O'Donnell. He's an American energy and geopolitical strategist based in Berlin. It's a great pleasure and an honor to see you again in our studio, Mr. O'Donnell.
Well, it's the same here. It's always a pleasure to be on TV in Ukraine.
Ukraine has struck Ust-Luga. It's in Leningrad Oblast for the first time, one of Russia's key oil export terminals. This is a port through which millions of tons of oil and petroleum products are shipped abroad from Russia. Can we see this, Mr. O'Donnell, attack as the beginning of a new strategy, not only targeting refineries, but also, kind of paralyzing Russia's oil export, the Kremlin's main source of income?
Yes, well, you make a very good distinction there. On the one hand, there's the campaign against refineries and infrastructure within Russia, which prevents Russia from having, the aim there is to prevent Russia from having sufficient refined products for their war industry, for harvesting crops, and actually for running the war in Ukraine. The other, if you hit by hitting the ports, which I've been advocating for a couple of years, as you know, if you hit these ports, Ust-Luga, Primorsk, Novorossiya, which is in the Black Sea, and the others are up north and near the Baltic. If you hit those ports and close those ports, then Russia can't export their crude oil, and that would be a big hit to their income, a very big hit. Now, the hit on Ust-Luga, as I recall, Ust-Luga was hit once before, about a year ago, and this is a hit again. And it's not completely clear yet, but it seems like this was a hit primarily on the LNG, on the natural gas processing facilities there that process natural gas into things like ethane, propane, and export that, which is very profitable. There may have been some hits also on the oil export aspects, but I haven't seen a consistent report, to be clear. There is another aspect of Russian oil export capacity, the pipelines, the big Druzhba pipeline, which was hit this last week, and that interrupted oil, it seems, to Hungary and Slovakia. But importantly, there was 2 pumping stations apparently damaged. And that oil also branches off and goes up north to these 2 ports, Ust-Luga and Primorsk, up north on the Baltic. And it's not clear if that will interrupt the flow of oil to these ports. They may have some storage there, and they would be repaired before the storage is used. So to answer your question briefly now, it's not clear to me that this is the beginning of a campaign to close those 3 external ports that export the oil. But it could be a step in that direction now.
Mr. O'Donnell, so am I understanding you right that we somehow got a permission from the United States to have these strikes into Russian ports, or it may cause some, diplomatic scandal?
That's a very good question. And first of all, let me make clear, there's never been anything official said that the United States does not want Ukraine to hit the oil export aspects of these 3 ports. But the reality is they can hit the ports, and they haven't hit the ports. And sort of in the business, oil business, some analysts, myself included especially, have said apparently the Americans don't give permission because they have this, since the Biden administration and Trump as well, they had this strategy of an oil price cap, which is supposed to keep the Russian oil flowing on the market, supposedly not to cause any upset in the market, any lack of oil, but to keep it below a certain price. Now, I've advocated that they hit those ports because there's plenty of oil out there to replace what's being exported. There's plenty of oil that's available from OPEC, from American shale. And it would make sense that now that Mr. Trump has had to has gotten more hard on Putin as far as oil exports by, for example, secondary sanctions on India, it would make perfect sense to now allow the Ukrainians to hit these ports and stop exporting the oil. Because after all, he's trying to stop the exports. But I would say that it's not clear yet if there is a major attack on one or two of these ports on the actual oil export terminal aspect of them, then that would clearly be the case.
Can Russia find another way to avoid stopping exporting its oil? What other ways do they have?
I think it's quite clear. If these three westward-facing ports were smashed, and I believe Ukraine's military could do this with their drones and especially the new missiles that are being developed, cruise missiles, Russia would have no other way to export this oil. This would be a huge hit to a few million barrels of exports a day and a huge hit to their budget. And it would also put their entire oil sector in jeopardy, because if they can't export this oil, then they have to stop pumping it because they don't have any significant place to store it. And these are very old fields, especially the West Ural fields that feed these ports, primarily feed these ports. And those fields are such that you can't really turn them off. If you turn them off, it would be very difficult to get them flowing again.
Yeah, Mr. O'Donnell, as long as you touched the question of a Ukrainian new missile, can this new Flamingo missile change the balance given its range and warhead capacity to strike deep inside the Russia?
Yes, from what, this is not my expertise, but from what I've read publicly, they have a 3,000-mile range and about a ton. That's a pretty significant punch. And so, for example, these three ports are clearly within range. And my understanding from the press is that Mr. Zelensky has indicated that towards the end of this year, early next year, Ukraine will really be mass producing these weapons. And the Americans complained under the Biden administration very viscerally when Ukraine started hitting the refineries inside Russia. And saying that this wasn't a good use of Ukrainian resources. It might have been for other reasons as well. But in any case, they came to the result that, look, these are Ukrainian resources, they're Ukrainian drones, and that's Ukraine's business, and we're not going to stop it. So I think the same thing would apply to these Flamingo missiles. Nobody can stop Ukraine from using them. Of course, American intelligence and targeting is very helpful. But I think Ukraine could use these to certainly utterly destroy the Russian capacity to export oil, and therefore it would have to shut down a significant part of its oil production capacity, which would probably be very long-term shutdown, very difficult to get going again, ever.
Yeah, and speaking about refineries, just to clarify again, the damage of it, can we say that Ukraine's drone strikes on Russian refineries, not only on oil terminals, export terminals, are causing Moscow also a lot of damage, maybe not less than any international sanctions?
Yes, this causes significant damage. Now, you recall that when Ukraine first started hitting these refineries, about 2 years ago, roughly, it caused major disruption to the Russians, but it didn't significantly undermine their ability to continue waging the war in Ukraine. I mean, it reduced the amount of diesel for trains, for locomotives. It reduced the amount of diesel they could bring to the war front. It especially reduced the amount of diesel for farmers to harvest crops. But I think at that point, considering the huge size of Russia's oil refining infrastructure, Ukraine didn't really have enough drones at that time to really significantly undermine it. Now, this drone war against the refineries has started again, and Ukraine is much more advanced in its capacity to build massive amounts of drones. And so it comes down to a statistics thing. Do they have enough to hit these refineries often enough, considering how long it takes the Russians to repair them, to keep a critical amount offline that really impedes their war fighting capacity? And that's what we should probably see over the next few weeks or couple months.
And also the petrol prices up nearly 50% since
Yes.
the start of the year,
Yes.
and shortages reported in Crimea and several Russian regions, as
Yes.
you're saying. Could this
Yes.
become a trigger for internal unrest in Russia?
Well, internally to Russia, it's a mixed situation. A country that's been converted totally to war production. On the one hand, people don't have trouble normally getting a job because there's the war production. The government is throwing lots of money into the economy, basically printing money. So, but on the other hand, you have the threat of inflation, and the economy is very unbalanced. It becomes difficult to get consumer goods. It becomes difficult to import things from abroad because the foreign exchange, dollars, euros, are used primarily to try and get war materials, right? So the Russian economy has been getting much more difficult for the central bank and for the finance ministry and so forth to control. And they have significant problems. On top of that, a high price of oil now inside oil products, diesel especially, which comes from these refineries, causes everything, the price of every commodity uses, directly or indirectly, uses this energy, and that causes significant difficulty. So that is one aspect, the economic aspect. And I would look, especially to when the harvest time comes, this could really undermine Russian agriculture because the farmers might not be able to afford the diesel for their tractors.
Yes. Yeah, and going back to my introduction, that I said that the Kremlin is now forced to buy fuel from Belarus, when
Yes.
not long ago it called itself as an energy superpower. How can we explain that?
Well,
that's the part of the same chain,
the
right?
success of the Ukrainian military. This is an indication of the success of the campaign. And this, if Ukraine has sufficient drones and can keep this campaign up in a steady way, as I said, to hit the refineries at the faster than the rate that they can be repaired, it will do very significant damage. And Russia, from being an energy superpower, will both internally start to have energy problems, which you've mentioned they do have. But importantly, I'm looking forward to also, Mr. Trump has not backed. It's interesting, during this peace negotiating process that's supposed to take a couple weeks until supposedly we'll see if Putin meets Mr. Zelensky, he has not backed off on the secondary tariffs, the secondary sanctions in the form of very high tariffs, 50% tariffs, 25% of which is due to, on India I'm talking about, 25% of which is due to India continuing to buy Russian oil. He has not backed off on that. His advisors, Mr. Navarro, wrote a very rather fiery op-ed in the Financial Times against the Indians for persisting in this, and his also his minister, his cabinet minister, Mr. Besant, has also done the same thing in interviews. So they haven't backed off on that. And India, the Indian firms are looking at other places to buy oil. So the Americans have not backed off during this period of negotiations or supposed negotiations, have not backed off on that pressure to kill Russian exports. So I'm looking forward to, I hope, this attack on the Druzhba pipeline and going after Ust-Luga indicates the beginning of a campaign also, not only against refineries inside Russia, but the export capacity in these ports.
But also, Mr. O'Donnell, if Russian economy is cracking, we don't see much of political crisis in the Kremlin, because while the West is waiting for for the huge sanctions against Russia that Trump is promising to impose every week, it seems like just Russia is using this time to strengthen its military production through China, through Iran, and other countries.
Okay. Well, my guess is that a country like Russia, which is an authoritarian regime where even big firms are essentially linked with the state firms, they don't collapse in the same way that a democracy would if it had these economic problems. In a democracy, they depend very much on the consumer's approval to buy products, and consumers might have citizens have the right to protest and so forth. None of that exists in Russia. So it's a very statist regime. And, money that normally goes for bread and butter, but also social services in Russia, is being diverted to the war efforts. And it's very difficult for the citizens to protest if they're upset about this, or to protest about a war where so many tens of thousands of soldiers are killed every month. So my guess is the war would get very difficult for the Kremlin to pursue, because it gets more and more expensive and they have to make difficult choices and so forth. But it might not collapse in the same way it would perhaps in a democracy where the people could protest. But it definitely undermines their capacity. If they don't have enough oil for the front, to be mobile, that's a significant hit. If they don't have enough oil to produce agriculture, which nowadays is after energy, the export of agricultural products, wheat especially, is a big contribution to the Russian budget. All these things make it more difficult. So I don't want to say that one front is like the key battle and that's the end of the war. It's like in the war itself. Every battle makes a contribution to eventually the collapse of the enemy's capacity.
Yeah. At the beginning of a full-scale invasion, Ukrainians were so waiting for Russians to go on the protest, because for what they have done to Ukraine, and what they have done to Mariupol, and we were hoping they're going to go to protest because of this war. Yeah. Then in 2023, we were waiting for them to protest because of the inner problems in Russia. And now, by watching what's happening there, I don't really believe that ever protest could happen in Russia.
Under the Tsar, there was a revolution. So it's not impossible that under an authoritarian regime. However, I grew up in a democracy in the United States, and we had a terrible war in Vietnam that the United States had lost something like 5 years before they withdrew. But even in a democracy, they insisted on pursuing that war, and terrible mass bombings of the country, even though they had no hope of winning it. And it took years for protests to build up in the United States. The fact that that soldiers die in a war, it's very difficult, on the one hand, sometimes for the families to admit to themselves that they died for the wrong cause, they died for an imperialist cause. And it takes a period of time. So I would say that even in a democracy, the state can do very strong propaganda. I talked to a fellow who just returned from Russia visiting some sick relatives, and there's so many lies in the media. People assume they lie. He said, but they can't imagine how everything is basically a lie, and so they end up actually believing a certain part of it. And it's very difficult. They can't even get a VPN to listen to any normal news broadcasts outside the country. It's very, very difficult. Only the opposition can sell some VPNs on the black market that work for a little bit of time to get some news. So I would not expect very quickly this to develop in Russia. It's possible that it will at some point, if Russia starts losing the war in an obvious way. But it's up to the Ukrainians to win the war, unfortunately, and their allies to help them at this point.
This is horrible, to be honest. They are living in a bubble of such a lie. Yes. They are so unreversibly brainwashed. Yeah. So
it's very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I'm here in Germany right now, and people tell me stories of what it was like during the war, or what it was like in Eastern Germany before the wall fell down. And it was a similar thing. It took people a period of time, of years, to realize what had been going on historically outside.
Yes. Mr. O'Donnell, winter is coming. Could Russia plan a major offensive against Ukraine before winter? And can the West prevent it?
Yeah. Well, this is not my area of expertise, military. There's a handful of people I listen to who they really are experts. Russia has had this summer offensive, and it's interesting. If you look at what Russia has gained since 2022, when the full-scale invasion began, as compared to what it had gained since 2014 in the initial invasion, it's actually a small percentage more for all the tens of thousands that die every month. So they're not making very great progress. There's always the possibility that there's a breakthrough someplace and a significant gain someplace. But Ukraine has successfully been basically holding back the Russians even during this offensive. So it's cost the Russians a lot. It would, to me, be unusual after this long period of attempted offensives that they're capable to launch something else at the beginning of winter. But as I say, I'm not the military expert.
Yeah. And the final question, to sum up all these successful Ukrainian attacks inside of Russia. So the key question, can Ukrainian strategy of energy strikes realistically force Putin to the negotiation table?
Right. Well, this is a war of, in a sense, this is also a war of attrition. It's a war of statistics. Russia is a huge country with a huge refining capacity and a huge oil producing capacity. So Ukraine, they tried this a couple of years ago, and it hurt Russia, but it wasn't sufficient to really undermine the oil sector or the energy sector. Now Ukraine can produce more drones, and they're drones that are more effective. So this is the war. Can Russia repair these things faster than they can be destroyed by Ukraine? And we won't know the answer to that question, I would say, for some weeks or maybe even some months. But I think there's a much better possibility of it right now than there was a couple years ago. That was a learning process. And if that happens, undermining the oil sector inside the country would be devastating to the capacity to pursue war. Anybody who knows the history of World War II, World War I knows, whether in the Pacific or in Europe, knows how critical the availability of lots of cheap oil to one side or the other was to pursue the war. And that's the same thing in Ukraine. So Ukraine is doing the right thing by going after this, and hopefully they'll be successful. And I hope, because the Americans apparently want to stop the export of Russian oil now, which is a change in their policy. That's why they're going after India for buying Russian oil. I hope that there's no impediments anymore to Ukraine going after and smashing the 3 westward-facing oil export terminals that we know they can reach.
Yeah, right. Well, that gives me some hope, Mr. O'Donnell. Thank you. Thank you again for your time, for your brilliant answers.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
Yeah, and I hope to see you again.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.